In 793 AD, the serene silence of Lindisfarne Monastery was abruptly shattered by cries of terror and furious flames. The abbey, which for centuries had stood as a symbol of faith and knowledge on the northern shores, found itself at the epicenter of an unimaginable nightmare. A group of ruthless raiders, who would later be known as Vikings, deemed this wealthy but utterly defenseless abbey easy prey, and they were not mistaken in their calculations. The plundering of Lindisfarne, like a clap of thunder, resonated across Europe, and this tragic episode is often called the starting point of a new, tumultuous era in the continent's history, the Viking Age. Following this unprecedented act of violence, the number of maritime raids and the audacious activity of these northern warriors across Europe increased to an unprecedented scale. So who exactly were these people? Their origins lie deep within the rugged lands of Scandinavia, the vast territories now occupied by modern-day Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. However, it would be a profound misconception to consider them a single, monolithic ethnic group. The peoples inhabiting these lands possessed a striking diversity of social customs and religious beliefs, and notably, they did not hesitate to turn their martial skills against each other if it promised any benefit. While the word Viking has become almost synonymous with raider or pirate in many minds, history reveals a far more complex picture. Many were merely entrepreneurial maritime traders whose ships cut through the waves transporting goods, while the overwhelming majority remained at home, dedicating their lives to peaceful, albeit arduous, farming. Agricultural conditions in Scandinavia were highly inconsistent, presenting a mosaic of opportunities and insurmountable difficulties. In the northern reaches of the vast territories settled by Vikings, farming was practically impossible due to the fierce and unforgiving climatic conditions that allowed no room for error. The southern regions of Denmark, along with certain more fertile parts of Norway and Sweden, were quite suitable for cultivation. However, a rapidly growing population necessitated a constant search for alternative food sources, with fishing and the bounty of the sea becoming vital supplements to meager harvests. The challenging climate and the rugged, mountainous terrain of Scandinavia also created immense obstacles for centralized governance. Kings, if they existed at all, often held only nominal power, as commanding those on a remote island, beyond an inaccessible mountain range, or across an impenetrable dense forest, was an almost impossible task. Nevertheless, the application of force remained one of the primary means of securing much-needed loyalty, alongside generously rewarding their faithful followers. In Scandinavia, there were indeed areas exceptionally rich in resources, and it was around these vital centers that sovereign power gradually concentrated, attracting ambitious chieftains. The history of 9th century Scandinavia is shrouded in a thick veil of myths and captivating legends. Frankly, very few events from that period can be confidently attributed to undeniable fact. A brief, but important, note on geographical names. In the subsequent narrative, the terms Danish, Swedish, and Norwegian will be used, but it should always be remembered that borders in Scandinavia at that time were not yet clearly established, much less permanent. People simply settled where conditions were most favorable for life and survival, without regard for future national divisions. In the 9th century, Norway, which derived its name from the ancient sea route along its rugged coast, the Northern Way, Norveger, was nothing short of a patchwork of countless small kingdoms. These tiny yet ambitious state entities relentlessly battled for dominance, rising and falling with alarming speed, like waves on a restless sea. This chaotic situation persisted until around 872 AD, when a king named Harald Fairhair emerged on the historical stage, a figure whose historical veracity, like much from that era, remains questionable and a subject of scholarly debate. Displaying incredible will and strategic thinking, he managed to establish his powerful base of authority over several decades, asserted undeniable supreme control over the northern territories, and then, at a climactic moment, crushed a coalition of minor kings in the famous and bloody Battle of Hafrsfjord. Following this decisive victory, which altered the course of Norwegian history, Harald solemnly proclaimed himself the first sole king of the Norwegians, uniting the scattered lands under a single banner. Regarding the territory of modern-day Denmark, the 9th century is no less obscure than for its northern neighbors. In fact, the name Denmark itself was not in use until approximately 930 AD, underscoring the period's uncertainty. However, from preserved historical chronicles of Charlemagne's powerful Frankish Empire, we know that some local lords wielded immense power, and that the Danes were renowned throughout Europe as skilled, brave, and extremely dangerous warriors. For Sweden, despite early settlement, detailed historical accounts are surprisingly scarce, leaving much of its early history a blank slate. What is certain is that its inhabitants lived predominantly in specific, favorable areas and actively interacted with neighbors across the Baltic Sea, which served as a bustling trade artery. Sweden, too, was divided into numerous small, competing kingdoms, confirming the general fragmentation in Scandinavia. It is also known that the Swedes regularly interacted with the Sami people to the north and likely adopted some of their religious customs, indicating cultural exchange. Thus, although relatively little is known about Scandinavia itself during this period, and its internal history remains largely a mystery, the peoples who emerged from there undoubtedly had a significant and at times destructive impact on other regions of Europe, forever changing their destiny. In the 9th century, a powerful wave of large-scale Viking invasions swept across Western Europe, like an unstoppable tsunami, leaving a trail of devastation. For example, Francia, heir to the Roman Empire, suffered brutal raids between 840 and 850, its lands and rivers stained with blood. The Franks put up fierce resistance, striving to protect their coasts and vital river routes, which forced the Vikings to turn their predatory attention elsewhere, to the British Isles. The British Isles endured relentless Viking raids for much of the 9th century, their countless accumulated riches attracting numerous invaders, primarily from Denmark, eager to seize these treasures. In the 860s, the so-called Great Heathen Army landed on Britain's shores, a formidable force whose arrival marked a new, even more terrifying phase of invasions. This army devastated many Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, leaving ruins in its wake and acquiring immense plunder. Meanwhile, the Norse, originating from Norway, conducted their daring raids along the northern and western coasts of Scotland, carving a path with fire and sword, and eventually reached the island of Ireland, where they continued their plundering expeditions and established new settlements. The reasons for these massive and destructive Viking raids are still a subject of active debate among historians, ranging from a simple lack of fertile land at home, necessary to support a growing population, to more complex motivations such as the pursuit of honor, glory, or even semi-religious motives related to beliefs in Valhalla. Soon, the Great Heathen Army transitioned from a phase of swift raids to one of full-scale conquests, a more ominous development. In a short period, they subjugated and colonized a vast area that would later be ominously named the Danelaw, the land of Danish law. The Norse, in turn, seized most of the northern islands of the British Isles and established strategically important settlements in places like Dublin and Cork, which quickly became prosperous but grim hubs of the slave trade, from where thousands of captives were sent abroad. And to their north, beyond the boundless expanses of the turbulent ocean, lay the mysterious, previously uninhabited island of Iceland. Iceland was settled by a man named